I'm David Goforth.
Hi, I'm Pam Uten. We're both with Cooperative Extension here in Cabarrus County.
And today, Pam, we've had our last frost, so a lot of the warm season stuff has died in our garden, but there's no reason we have to stop eating local. And what we've got here is a display of a number of vegetables that we have grown in our gardens during the summer, and now we hold them on into the winter and show you how to make some seasonal dishes with what we've got right here.
Well, they really look great and colorful too. And
oh, yeah.
the nice thing about this is that they will store for several months. And I'm sure you will talk about that later on.
Well, the spaghetti squash, which we've got right here, that is probably the least, maybe a month to 2 months on the spaghetti squash. The acorn squash, maybe 2 or 3 months on it. The butternut squash here is one of the better ones as far as winter storage. And all your squash are fairly nutritious. They've got the vitamin A, which you might guess from the color here, but we've got vitamin A with this, and calcium, magnesium, a number of good sources of nutrition with our winter squash. I think it makes a good meal this time of the year with that. Now, the acorn squash here, sometimes you'll see it sort of orange like this. It is actually green when it's mature ripe. This looks mature ripe here. And surprisingly, they've got some different color ones now that actually taste better, just nobody buys them. They want to buy them green with the green color. That's what people are used to, and I've grown the other type. There's one carnival, if you're ever growing one in your own garden, that I think is very tasty on the winter squash, and you'll be showing us a little bit about them later. In addition to winter squash, we've got the potatoes, which people are familiar with, and we grow them in the garden here, and you can store them very easily up till December. We used to store them year-round when we didn't have any other options, but you'd have to knock the sprouts off as you got on into the winter on those. And then the sweet potato is the other one. This is a local sweet potato. Actually, this is grown down towards Candor where they have sandier soils. We can grow sweet potatoes here in Cabarrus County. They sometimes don't look as clean because we've got clay soils, but they will also store very well at home. We can do very good with those on up till next spring. And of course, commercially, they do a little bit better job and they'll store them year round. So you can actually go to the stores and get them year round. But it's something we can grow in the garden, and this time of the year, we can eat local with this right here.
Well, really, David, you know, like you were saying, we can even eat local through the fall and into the winter and maybe even the first of the year with these vegetables.
And I think this is the first. This is actually from your home garden.
Yes, please make note of this. My husband, Don, grew this butternut squash, and it wasn't grown here in Cabarrus County, David. I hope that's okay. We've inherited kind of a little farm in the mountains, and he grew this butternut squash, and I think it's just gorgeous. Aren't they supposed to look kind of dusty and a little milky, and the stem is still on it, and it's not a moist stem, it's a dry stem? One
advantage that you have in the mountains is you have a little bit cooler weather when you're trying to harvest this, and they do appreciate the cooler weather, and that may be why the size that you've got that size versus the size this is from my garden here where it's a little bit warmer and the plant just grew a little bit smaller. So in our home gardens we still get some quality here. They decide they would just grow a little bit smaller size than that. Now as far as the stem here, if this broke off when I harvested it, and if it dries solid here, it'll cure. That's not a problem in a home situation. Of course, I'd want to eat this one before I would eat that one because that one should last longer with the stem on it. So you got to be careful. And I normally just take the pruning shears and cut the stem where it won't break off, but for some reason in the transport or whatever, that one broke off. But it's still good squash at that point there. Pam, what I think I want to do with this squash here is we'll do a roasted vegetable. We've done roasted before, and of course everything we said was true, but we'll show you just how to do it with these particular ones right here. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start with a marinade. And I'm gonna use olive oil, about 1/4 of a cup of olive oil, and a little bit of, this is red wine vinegar. You hear a lot of people talk about balsamic vinegar, which I understand is actually not local, it's from Italy. It's sort of a legal term, it has to be from Italy to be called balsamic vinegar. And sometimes I think we don't get real good taste in our, what we call balsamic vinegars around here, but anyway, I've tasted some better from some of these specialty stores or whatever, but I just used a regular wine, red wine vinegar. So about 1/4 of a cup of olive oil, couple tablespoons of vinegar, and I decided to add some rosemary and black pepper was my choices. And I assume you could add a few other choices. Thyme would probably be another good one that you could add to this here. And I just mixed them in here, and I'll need to stir them a little bit to get that mixed up when I'm ready to coat them. And just set those over out of the way.
And David, while you're kind of moving some things, several ladies have said, oh, it's so hard to know how to use butternut squash. So I'm thrilled that we're roasting butternut squash for our friends to see. I think that people think it's very difficult to prepare.
Yeah, it's mainly just, a lot of times, to be honest with you, we'll eat it, just stuff it like you're going to do with those acorn squash over there. It's a very easy trick to do with that, and I like to do some kind of way like that.
Well, the butternut squash are really, really versatile. You can puree them, and add all kinds of ingredients. You know, I've seen ideas of butternut squash served with spinach salad and with cheese, butternut squash soup. The ideas for using butternut squash are just totally endless, I guess you would say.
And on the soups, actually, I've seen them put them in there with the skins on. We're going to take the skin off here for what we're doing, but
well, David and I kind of had a debate about skins on butternut squash or skins off butternut squash. You know, we are often kind of opposed or different in our ideas. Would that be a good way to put it? But anyway, generally, if you're going to be cooking butternut squash, all my sources say that you want to take this skin off if it's a cut butternut squash. And I'm so glad that we're doing that today.
Well, it was a chef that cooked that meal I ate with the skin on it. So.
Oh, was it? Okay, yeah. Well, what do we know?
He hopefully knew what he was doing. Now, you were talking about some neat, tricky way to peel these. I've always just peeled them with a knife. So how would you do it?
Well, for this butternut squash, this was so huge, I cut off cut it off at the bulb, so to speak, and used the upper part, and I pared it with a knife also too. In a few minutes, we'll talk about microwaving the vegetables, and that's surely a lot easier to peel when it's been microwaved. You're doing a great job. That's a sharp knife, and you're getting down to the pretty orange, fleshy part. And
yeah, in fact, I didn't want to go back and nibble that off there, because that'll be just a little bit harder, a little bit different mouthfeel if you don't get that off there.
Well, and you know, some ideas are to cut it off smooth at the bottom so you can anchor it on your cutting board. Some folks will use a vegetable peeler to get that skin off, but you're doing a great job paring it off with a small knife.
All right.
And our ladies, or I shouldn't say our ladies, but our friends watching this always want the recipe. And we do have the recipe that we'll be showing, I hope, later on or as part of this telecast.
Well, the recipe can be flexible, of course.
The recipe definitely can be flexible. David, are you going to add squirrel to this?
No squirrel, no squirrel.
Oh, this is a record. We're not having squirrel.
Any kind of strange,
any strange meat, or are you pulling any stunts on this?
What I was going to say though was that we can add some peppers. Would be really nice. We do have some red peppers, and I just walked off and forgot to bring them. But
the red peppers really add a lot of color and a lot of vitamin C.
On that.
And in fact, after I got this recipe from you, I made it this weekend, and the red peppers just make it gorgeous after it's been roasted.
Yeah. And you would have red peppers maybe earlier in the season, right after frost. In other words, we went out the night before it was frosting, and we picked all the peppers in the garden and probably had a half bushel or so, and so they'll last for a while. And this time of the year, peppers are very good, high quality, because they are sort of a cool season. Well, they actually come from the tropics, higher elevations in the tropics where they are a little bit cooler. Now this, I'm going to divide this just a little bit here to
this red onion.
Yeah, you don't have to divide it totally up, but you can make it just a little bit smaller here to roast a little bit better.
Spread that flavor out a little bit more. And as you said, we did roasting before, and when we roast vegetables, we're cooking them or roasting them at a really high temperature. And with just a little bit of marinade, or it's almost a dry roast, but at a high temperature. That makes it a roasted vegetable.
This is toss. Are you going to toss it for me?
Am I going to toss it? Well, I've got a wooden spoon here.
Why don't we just stir it a little bit?
Okay.
Trying to coat that pretty good and not have a lot of extra.
The way we decided to use this recipe, David was telling me about this delicious recipe that he had. He called his wife, Renee, at home, and she very quickly sent us the recipe. So this is one that David picked out that he had enjoyed at his home.
All right. And now we want to put it into a dish. And this, I use some larger chunks in here, and something like that's probably going to take close to 30 minutes. And so we'll put it in the oven at a very high temperature, around 450 degrees, and then we'll you need to turn it over, stir it a little bit, about every 10 minutes. Mm-hmm. And I have done that.
You've done it? Oh,
You'll
great.
see the results look like this right here.
Oh, that looks delicious, David.
I didn't sneak a few. It does taste
Have
delicious
you already
too.
had a couple samples?
Yeah. So that's what we're doing, but a good, timely dish for this time of the year, Pam.
And really into the next couple of months also.
Right.
Super, great. Well, let's now change pace and go to an idea using apron squash. And I just think these apron squash are just the most interesting looking vegetable. Certainly they remind us of an acorn. One of the most challenging parts of using any of the winter squash is sometimes cutting into it. And I've cheated a little bit today, as you see, and I've already gotten my knife started in a couple of places to make it easier. Of course, it's been stuffed together, so it may not be as easy as we thought. Generally, we're going to be using, there we go, a serrated knife, and you can straighten this up after you have baked it. We're going to be baking this acorn squash. Now, as you can tell, when you open a squash, any kind of winter squash, be it butternut squash, acorn squash, spaghetti squash, or even that traditional squash, pumpkin, you're going to find lots of seeds. And what you do want to do is you want to scrape the seeds out. You certainly can save the seeds and roast them if you'd like to, but not only pumpkin seeds, but any of these vegetables can have the seeds roasted. And you can see I'm just kind of taking the seeds out. For right now, I'm going to put them over here. We're going to add some more things in just a few minutes. I'm going to take these seeds out. Have you ever roasted pumpkin seeds,
Yeah,
David?
the trick on it is not to roast them very much. It's very easy to overcook. Particularly squash seed like this are a little smaller than pumpkin seeds, and so you're only getting them in the oven for just a few minutes, and they are to the point where you need. And then we like to actually, those a lot of times we put a little salt on them.
Salt, a little bit of oil. Our low temperature oven to roast the pumpkin seeds is what you want to use. And our specialists say that we should wash the seeds and wash the membranes. Some sources tell us that we really don't need to wash those pumpkin seeds, but I think I like to. And you know, one thing, David, we have forgotten to mention as we have started this whole thing, we really have forgotten something real important. You know what we forgot?
Oh, I forgot it.
You know, you forgot it? Well, I forgot it too, but one thing that we didn't mention, and I guess we just kind of take it for granted, but all these vegetables need to be washed really well on the outside before we ever start cutting into them. And I can honestly say that I did wash this acorn squash. The butternut squash has been washed. The spaghetti squash, which we really won't be using, hasn't been washed. and I know you washed your vegetables too.
Oh, yeah.
But we forgot to mention that, and that's really important. We always want to wash our vegetables. Now we're ready to turn the acorn squash cut side down in our baking dish, our baking pan, and we will bake this at about 350 degrees for about 45 minutes. Okay, so we're now ready to put this in the oven. Some of our sources will say put a little bit of water in here. Some will say put nothing in. I'm using a recipe from Brenda Sutton, who is the produce lady with Cooperative Extension. And her suggestion is not to put any water in the bottom of the butternut squash. We're going to start with a half a cup of butter in your mixing bowl. And I guess you could cut the amount of butter if you wanted to a little bit to save calories, but this is going to be so good. You really probably want to use the half cup of butter because acorn squash has a tendency to be a little bit bland. So we're kind of trying to dress it up. So we're then going to add 2 cups of finely chopped apples. And for fun, I'm using a variety of apples. I've got some Red Delicious apples. I've got some McIntosh, and my favorite is a Honeycrisp. So they're all going in. And next we will add some cinnamon. And I love cinnamon. It calls for 1 teaspoon, but this is the time that I use a little bit more cinnamon, I think. And a half a teaspoon of salt. We're just adding everything in here. And then we're going to go ahead and add 2 teaspoons of lemon juice to kind of add a little flavor. We'll now add almost a cup of chopped pecans. And we grow pecans locally here in Cabarrus County.
That's why my fingers are stained today, Pam. I did wash my hands.
I was looking at your hands and I kind of wondered what was going on. Were you picking pecans?
Yep.
Last night? Yesterday?
Yesterday.
Well, where are mine?
They still need to dry a little bit.
Well, thanks. Okay, well, while he's telling us about the pecans he picked and didn't bring us any, I'm just going to go ahead and mix this up and be ready for the acorn squash that'll come out in about 45 minutes. Here are our baked acorn squash, and we're ready now to flip them over. Don't they look nice? And this reminds me of something I want to say. You can tell that they're very, very hot. You see the steam, and they've almost caramelized. And if you're having trouble with one of them staying up, such as this one, I found it's really easy to take the squash out and just trim off a little bit on the edge to kind of make it a flatter surface. And that way it will stay. I've tried it both ways, trimming the edges before it's been baked and trimming the edges after it's been baked. And it's much easier to trim after it's been baked. Okay, now we're ready to add our yummy ingredients. We're going to fill the acorn squash, and you think when you look at all that, good heavens, you've got so many ingredients. It's not going to, we won't need all that, but you're going to be surprised we will. And I think I'm going to use this big spoon to fill it. You could really vary this recipe in a couple of different ways. I would love some chopped pears, some raisins would be great in here, some perhaps currant, a half a teaspoon or a half a cup of currants would be great too. And the butter hasn't melted yet, and we didn't really want it to. It will melt.
Sometimes we'll just use plain applesauce in there a lot of times, a little applesauce, a little cinnamon, and bake them like that.
Oh, that sounds delicious too.
Well, this looks a lot prettier, don't it?
Well, I hope so. I hope it's going to look simply local and simply, I hope it's going to look really simple. This is really very, very simple. And the nice thing about this, as you see, it prepares 4 halves. Well, my husband and I cannot possibly eat 4 halves in one night or one meal. So we've put them in the refrigerator and heated them the next day, and they're just wonderful the next day. Same way with what you prepared. It's a wonderful thing to go in the refrigerator and be heated the next day.
They do have some varieties that are a little bit smaller now, and I grew one of those this past year called Honey Bear, but it didn't seem to be quite the quality that I wanted for a acorn squash. So I'm not sure if that's the final answer or not, but they are trying to grow some smaller acorn squash. So if you see some personal size ones, maybe something to try.
I think those are beautiful. Beautiful, and I'll be honest, when we've had them at home, they've been really just about our whole meal. You don't have to worry about a whole lot else with that. Okay, gonna add just a couple of more. Then the next thing we're gonna do is just toss the rest of the pecans that we've been saving on top. There we go. These are well packed, aren't they? And a sprinkle of nutmeg, if you like nutmeg, just a light little sprinkle. So now we're ready to put these in the oven, and we're going to bake them at 350 degrees for about 15 minutes. Really, everything, we're just blending the flavors now. Great. While they're cooking, I did want to mention the fact that, you know, if you wanted to speed up this process, David, you could certainly microwave these vegetables. We're kind of illustrating today baking vegetables, and of course that process takes about 45 minutes, but if you are pressed for time, you could always microwave this acorn squash. But the secret is you want to put or place or put your knife or fork in several times around, so you've got a way for the air to come out. And that same thing would apply with the spaghetti squash. And if you ended up cooking a butternut squash whole, which I don't think you would, you'd always want to place some holes. You'd microwave this for 8 to 10 minutes. Then we would stuff it just like we did the other more traditionally baked, and then we would microwave this in the oven for about 4 or 5 minutes covered. But that's a time saver. You can certainly do that.
And I certainly like those baked in the regular oven a lot, but I've started doing spaghetti squash in the microwave, and you don't have to worry about making the holes if you'll just cut it in half and take the seeds out, and a little bit of water to microwave this. And I found that's to be a real time saver on spaghetti squash, is microwaving them.
And spaghetti squash, when you cut it in half and you pull out the seeds and you've baked it, it really is going to look like spaghetti or pasta, and it's going to be kind of bland. And most people, if they're using a spaghetti sauce, will add something like chopped tomatoes and some things to give it flavor. Well, David, our acorn squash is completed. And doesn't that look, I think it looks lovely. Doesn't that look seasonal and festive and all those wonderful things? And it tastes good too, as well as being healthy. Also, I have this out to show just to remind myself to tell you this. I baked this 3 days ago. Covered it, put it in the refrigerator, and have heated it again, and doesn't it look just as fresh as the one that was baked this morning? So this is a real good hint for busy people, and we're all busy. You can bake these in the oven or microwave, and if you don't eat them all, cover them and enjoy the next night or the next night. It's a great idea to have some planned for a future meal. David, hadn't it been fun to talk about these wonderful winter vegetables?
Yes, and we can eat simply local.
We can eat simply local, and we can eat smart at the same time.